Hey guys, welcome to the Ad Astra podcast, the podcast where we integrate space, policy, and technology. I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a Master's of Public Policy degree with a concentration in science and space policy.
And I have a PhD in computer science, and I'm an all-around tech geek.
Okay guys, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Ad Astra Podcast and subscribe to our mailing list on elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team. And today, we're going to be talking about Newton.
First we're going to get started talking about someone's article.
Oh, stop.
Someone that we all know and love published an article on the Apollo formula. And I don't know if you want to get into that right away, or maybe we should hang on about that one, because we have a few more items that we're going to talk about today. The first being the NASA software catalog. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the MAVEN news, and then dive deeper into a little bit of policy, talking about China launching their space station core modules and Jeff Bezos heading to the moon. And then I think someone wanted to say something about SpaceX today.
Yeah, I have to air some of my thoughts out. Like Newton said, today, March 6th, when we're recording, today, my article got published in the Space Review. It was originally a paper I had written to one of my culminating papers to graduate in December, and I decided to submit it to the Space Review, which is a bit more of I guess I would describe it more as a professional journal. I don't know how.
That's about right.
Yeah. It's a little less academic. It's not tied to a university or anything.
It's more like an industry-based journal. Yeah,
it's like industry and professionals and people who just really love space write for it, and they accepted my paper. So
absolutely. So
I'm going to add author to my resume. So.
Nicely done. So congrats, Jack. Once again, that's called the Apollo formula, and you can go to www.thespacereview.com to check that out.
Yeah, and we'll include links in the show notes below.
Yep. So not that we want to step away from that beautiful article, but one of the first things that we should talk about today is NASA's big news. They opened up an entire software catalog to the public. NASA's Technology Transfer Office published its 2017-2018 software catalog. This is basically an open source directory, or at least mostly open source directory, offering some of NASA's coolest tools and open source software libraries and packages. This is something that NASA has done in multiple ways before. Each of the different labs have posted their own open source technologies, things like NASA Whirlwind or specific machine learning libraries that are regularly used by NASA. But this is sort of everything that the Tech Transfer Office could get their hands on within NASA, all in one place for developers to get a hold of. It separates these open source software packages and programs into 15 different categories, from business systems and project management to libraries for system testing, data processing and handling, analysis of structures and mechanisms, and aeronautics, and so on and so on. You can get your hands on that at software.nasa.gov. Like I said, it's supposed to be highly open to the public software directory, but some of the software packages require at least a request to be put into NASA for government export control restrictions. Anyone that's dealt with, had to deal with anything for the U.S. government over the last year and a half understands what I mean when I say that NASA is being careful about export control restrictions. There's been actually, Jack, you could probably talk to some of that policy.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's only been a year and a half. I mean, NASA being as technologically superior as it is to a lot of other space agencies and frankly, a lot of militaries, they have to be very careful in what technology they let out the door. It does sometimes surprise me that their spinoff office is so forthcoming with all that information. Granted, like the software catalog isn't spinoffs, though they're probably going to spin that to include the catalog in next year's edition. But the government is very tight-lipped when it comes to things that it's developing for an obvious reason. I mean, it's sort of still in this Cold War mindset of we have to be ahead of the curve always, and that's not necessarily a bad thing right now. I mean, you could make an argument for loosening them or tightening them, but I don't think anybody worth their weight is saying that we should just get rid of all ITAR restrictions or all export restrictions.
Sure. And part of it too, honestly, and this is actually something where I know a little bit of policy here. Part of it, these aren't restrictions that, were specific to NASA. I know folks in the DoD and Department of Energy who are subject to these restrictions that come down from on high. Department of Commerce, as well as the State Department, sets certain export regulations that all of the other agencies have to adhere to, along with their own export regulations, and some of those have gotten a bit stricter, I believe, for Department of Commerce, and that's been impacting multiple other departments, both the agencies proper, NASA, DARPA, DOD. Most of these DoD and DOE agencies have been feeling the pain of that, as well as many of their contractors. So that's it's something that it's just the new normal that we're going to have to deal with.
I sort of, another paper I wrote sort of deals with these regulations. This one is not published yet, but dealing with whether there should be a Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. Sort of centralizing all of, I mean, it doesn't have to be extraterrestrial, but I think DEXA sounds really cool for a government agency. But it sort of centralizing all of these regulations, because like you're saying, like some of these regulations are coming from commerce, some are coming from state, some come from within NASA, some come from within other agencies. And looking at, I mean, some of the big things where a lot of money is made in space, like telecommunications, they have to go through FCC to make sure they have the spectrum allocated. They have to go through FAA to make sure they can fly the thing. And then
DOD.
They have to go through DOD to make sure that they're allowed to
talk to the boys at JSPOC and try to get and try to make sure that you're not colliding with anything. There's just so many channels to go through, and if we're going to start if we're planning on starting all these new commercial markets in space, I actually think that's quite reasonable. But
Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs.
The problem with that, and I can already see a political problem coming from that, is if you name a department the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs, I can see the people at NASA just jumping up and screaming about that. Going, hey, what the hell are we?
NASA's holding on to the very few regulatory things that it gets to do. I mean, it gets to human rate flights, which is a very big deal, and especially with SpaceX and Blue Origin talking about their moon missions. More to come later.
Foreshadowing, I love it.
I know. I'm very coy about the whole thing. But NASA gets to do like some things, and it kind of likes to hold on to being able to do those things because the Space Act that sort of created NASA. It created NASA. Only a little bit. The act that created NASA talks sort of vaguely about the role of NASA as a regulatory body. Now, I don't even think they use the word regulation in that piece, but interpretations of that law by space lawyers and other types of lawyers talk about or have sort of set the precedent that NASA does get to regulate some things. Now, a DEXA, I mean, we could have 10 whole episodes on this. It's our catchphrase, I guess. A DEXA could be good for if you're really thinking long term and really willing to put in not just $20 billion, but a little bit more into your space program and developing a commercial space infrastructure. I mean, just like we did in the early 20th century when developing the commercial airline industry. I mean,
sure,
that I don't even think that a commercial airline made any money until like the 1960s. And even then, from then until now, they're still hemorrhaging money because it's such a difficult, technologically intense field to be in. And you need that government support in order to keep it going, because if you don't have a commercial airline industry, I mean, your whole economy is going to collapse. But we're getting to the point where the reliance on satellite communications, and now with the emergence of companies like O3B and OneWeb, these sort of satellite-based internet providers, it's going to become integral to have a space network, a commercial space network that is able to sustain itself, whether that's through government funding, which, you know, if it follows anything like the airline industry, it's going to need government funding. And if that's the case, then the government's going to have to pony up and say, this is integral to our economy. If we don't invest in it, someone else will, or the economy is going to collapse because it's growing too fast for us to keep up with.
I agree with I agree with the certain need for that. My question is, do we think that it's going to warrant an entirely new department? Well, do you think it will result in an entirely new department, or simply an extension of the powers of, let's say, FAA, with maybe some extension of NASA's powers, because eventually those are going to, in my view, shift to strictly, you know, if we're talking about the future, you know, it's going to be strictly for, you know, things that are not near Earth. Whereas I could see like an FAA just being focused on near Earth without actually having to form an entirely new department, just extending the powers of those organizations. One, do you think it will result in that? Two, I mean, do we really need to have, do we need to have a new department for that? Or is that extension, should that extension just be good enough? If they're already doing it here on Earth, and we're already having several organizations kind of extend their powers already to deal with things like launching CubeSats and some of these smaller space vehicles. Do we need an entirely new organization to deal with that?
So two things. I think if we do go ahead with creating a whole new department, I think then you get into this really murky place where you're defining the difference between air and space. Because the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they define basically anything that's not on four wheels and not in the ocean as being airborne. And you will get this, I mean, with the Department of Defense too. Like, for a long time, there was discussion about changing the Air Force into an Air and Space Force, or just calling it the Aerospace Force, which, like, what does aerospace even mean? Like, does that mean air and space? Does it mean somewhere in between? I mean, there's a semantic argument that you have to make then of where does air, like the air end and the space begin? Because you could say the Carmine line, but that's, 100 kilometer, it's like what, 80 to 100 kilometers up. It's not defined.
I forget what it technically is, but I think we have the internet to help us.
it's something like that. But like, is that the dividing line? But like, when it comes to 60 kilometers to 80 kilometers, nothing flies up there. Should that be like, that's not even balloon territory?
For listeners' clarification, the Carmine line, it lies at an altitude of 100 kilometers above the Earth's sea level.
So
just for clarification,
let's say like 60 to 100 kilometers then is an area that no jetliners or anything use. I mean, we don't have scramjets yet. But like, where is that dividing line? And that's a discussion that then we have to have if we're going to go forward with developing a new agency. The other thing I was going to bring up was if we were having this conversation in 1969 or 1975 or something, like there would be a Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs and then there'd be something of a comparable budget within the Department of Defense that does almost the exact same thing.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like it's a sign of the times how the government responds to changes in the market. I mean, you could have very well seen a whole different situation play out in 2008 or in 2009 with the stimulus bill. You could totally have seen a completely different, like you could have seen them just kind of let the whole thing go if it had happened 20 years earlier and just seen what happened. Or you could have seen an even more proactive approach by the federal government if it was happening 60 to 70 years ago. But your government actions are dependent on the times, on the culture and the expectations of government. So I don't necessarily think that we're going to have a Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs soon. But as
I don't believe anytime soon.
Yeah,
no.
But as the pendulum swings back and forth from it being sort of a anti-government, sort of decentralize everything, which is what we currently have. I mean, this is the time that we live in. Even under Obama, we sort of saw this decentralization of the government and focus more on regional and municipal governments for the implementation of policies. You could see a swing all the way back to a solid, state-run, with an iron fist mentality, and the creation of a Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. The SEXA, I don't know what the secretary of that would be.
Secretary. Oh God.
There's going to be so many jokes if this actually happens.
Oh God.
The SEXA, but they.
But yeah, I mean, we can only speculate. You're right. We can only speculate based on depending on, and who knows where that line is going to come, the line that we cross where we decide that we need a Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. What is the deciding discovery or action that pushes us there?
I think the line's at 100 kilometers.
So don't let anyone tell you this isn't a smart guy.
So let's bring this sort of back down to Earth and then go back to Mars, because you actually showed me this thing about MAVEN almost hitting Phobos.
So let's let me go back. I just want to give you a couple of quick numbers here. We have a cubical satellite that orbits Mars in an elliptical orbit. The platform for the satellite is about 2.3 by 2.3 by 2 meters in size. It's basically a satellite that consists of aluminum honeycomb sandwiched between graphite composite face sheets for all of the chemistry / materials engineering geeks who understand that. And the core of that structure, all three of you. And the core of its structure is about a 1.3 meter diameter cylinder that encloses a propellant tank of this spacecraft that we call Mars MAVEN. So the MAVEN, so MAVEN is orbiting Mars in an elliptical orbit. And today, as we're talking about this today on Monday, March 6th, with about a week's advance notice, it looked like MAVEN and Mars's moon Phobos had a good chance of hitting each other today. They discovered this about a week ago. But what they discovered was that MAVEN and Phobos were about to come their orbits were about to come about 7 seconds so within about 7 seconds of each other. So once again, MAVEN is 2.3 by 2.3 by 2 meters. Phobos has a dimension of 27 by 22 by 18 kilometers. And space, to use a technical term, is really big. So the the odds of that happening, or dare I say it, astronomical.
Oh,
no, actually, they could be modeled. And this is and that's why that's why they discovered this. They were just continuously analyzing, Phobos's orbit, and about a week ago, the folks at JPL noticed that, hey, that is actually going to come within 7 seconds of Phobos, and decided to to pull a maneuver around it, just burn some fuel and shift the trajectory of Mars MAVEN. So that happened.
Yeah, like you said, Phobos, space
Yes.
is really big. Phobos, not so big.
There's plenty of room for both of you guys.
Plenty of room for everything, because it is everything.
It's just astounding to me that almost happened. So I mean, that's not really that's not that big of a piece of news, but it's always interesting when something like that happens. That's not to say that plenty of things don't collide with both Mars and Phobos, but the one thing that we happen to send up there just
happens to almost hit it.
Yes.
I can already hear the conspiracy theorists, the gears turning, war declared on Phobos.
Of course.
But you're right. It's insane. It's ridiculous that this small, 2.3 by 2.3 by 2 meter cube, basically, going, what is it? 4,000 kilometers per hour or something like that.
Yeah, I'd have to pull the number. I think it's something like that, 4,000 some odd kilometers. That thing could just collide with something. And things collide with Phobos and Mars and Deimos all the time, but whoever built those things really knew how to ruggedize it. We didn't do that with MAVEN. MAVEN, it would be like a little bug on the windshield of Phobos. So, and it just kind of shake it off and sort of be done with it. It just kind of adds to the fact that Phobos and Deimos. So Mars is also known as, Ares, the god of war in Greek mythology, but Phobos and Deimos, Phobos is known as panic and fear, and Deimos is terror and dread. So it just makes sense that we would have things colliding with it from from this far away, just incidentally.
I also just think it'd be like, what would the public reaction be if NASA held a press conference and they're like, hey, so here's the thing.
That $600 million satellite that
$600 million. We crashed it. And NASA does this all the time. I mean, we saw this with that was ESA that did Rosetta, but I mean, we're seeing it with Cassini later this year that it's gonna deorbit into Saturn. They're gonna crash it. They're done. Yep. I mean, we saw this with
I can't wait for those pictures, by the way, because they're taking pictures on the way down, which is
absolutely
amazing.
They did that with the spacecraft that went to Mercury they crashed it in 2004 or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Messenger.
Messenger. Yes.
They did that where they took photos as you got closer to the ground, and then eventually it was like, oh, where did all the photos go? Oh, it crashed. And they also do that with Venus almost in incidentally. They don't mean to do it with Venus. They just kind of are like, oh, we're going to land on Venus. Oh, we lost the spacecraft because it's now being disintegrated by the ridiculously greenhoused. Is that a word? Greenhouse.
Yes, it's been greenhoused.
Sounds like if Bill Nye was a professional wrestler, that would be his signature move. He's going to greenhouse you.
Just got greenhoused. You're still on the Bill Nye kick. I understand.
Still am.
You're still on the high.
Still am.
Yes.
Being able to have one-on-one conversations with him and meet Bernie Sanders was still super cool. Sorry, I'm just going to keep talking about it for the next 4 episodes. Just skip ahead if you don't want to listen to it.
Did you meet Bill Nye and Bernie Sanders?
I was in the room
because I haven't heard about it for the
Bill
last week.
Nye. This is for our new listeners. I was in the room with Bill Nye and Bernie Sanders, and they talked about space and science and all this fun stuff. But so,
but yes,
I guess we
but
should.
Yes, but back on track. Yeah, So Phobos collided. That was just some big news this week that we almost lost a $600 million satellite, and by almost, I mean they caught it a week ago, and we're able to conduct a maneuver to get it out of the way, which is, that's why we have kinematics, Newton's laws, orbital mechanics. I mean, that's
Your laws.
yes, my laws. That's why I created them. But moving on from there, you were just talking about the expense of space and the price tag on losing something and how we sometimes intentionally do those things. This is actually one of the bigger fears of one of the bigger cautionary tales for the commercial markets that are trying to get into space. And we had some big news on one particular commercial organization trying to focus on space travel as well, which is Jeffrey Bezos with Blue Origins. He's been circulating a 7-page white paper to NASA leadership and President Trump's transition team about the company's interest in developing a lunar spacecraft with a lander that would touch down near a crater at the South Pole, where there's water and nearly continuous sunlight for solar energy. So no surprise there, kind of following in the path of SpaceX, but not even necessarily SpaceX, more so just the announcement that the transition team really wants to be focused on the moon and focused on, to some extent, a significant number of lunar missions and getting us back to the moon where we were during the Apollo era. So,
which, and you said it, you said transition team, and it's almost month 2 of the administration that they still don't have a NASA administrator. I mean, like NASA is just not a priority. And we even saw that with, on the Hill. So last week, I think we talked about the NASA authorization and how it was on the House schedule, and then
the reauthorization bill.
Yeah, it's still not on the schedule. So, and I've heard some new rumors from the rumor mill that.
Who'd you hear? Did you hear from your best friend Bernie?
from Bernie Sanders. It's huge. This news is huge. No, but on the House side, it could be as bad as scrapping the whole bill to just a few minor tweaks. Now, with this administration, there's no telling. Like, they could very well be like, scrap the bill, write a new one that just says, we're going to go to the moon, America's great, sad. Or just hashtag China steals jobs or something. I don't know.
And that's when NASA just dumps all that money into environmental funding without anybody knowing about it. Fine, don't pay attention to us.
All that extra money that NASA has just laying around. Yeah, because
exactly.
they get an increase in their budget every year. Like, they probably have a couple billion just.
I'm sure they're fine.
Yeah, no, NASA doesn't need a budget increase. Members of Congress, if you're listening, please increase NASA's budget.
Please, we're really counting on it.
We really are. I've been telling my friends who are staffers on the Hill, just tell your Republican colleagues and people who are on the fence about it, 20 in 2017, 20 billion in 2017.
I like that.
I mean, an increase across the board too, not to any specific program or anything. I mean, we need SLS and Orion. I'm going into my pitch now. We need SLS, Orion. We need James Webb. We need to keep operating all the satellites we currently do and start these long-term planning missions like I was sort of telling you about. We won't really get too much into this. This could be maybe something for the next 10 episodes, is the Planetary Science Vision 2050 conference seminar thing that they put together.
Yes.
Yep. That we need to start working on these long range plans now, so that it's not 2025 and we've missed 2 launch windows to go to Mars and we don't have anything to send. I mean, it's telling that basically every 2 years we send something new to Mars since the 90s. I mean, even going back into the 80s, it was almost every 2 to 4 years we sent something to Mars. after 2020, the rover that they're going to be sending, we have maybe a reconnaissance orbiter, another MRO, going in 2022, but we have nothing else planned after that. And if we're going to get humans on the surface in 2033, which is a ideal year, the way the orbits work, with 2035 being sort of the backup year for that,
right?
Like, we got to get going on these things. Like, so Congress peoples, friends on the Hill, tell your colleagues to 20 in 2017.
Absolutely.
But so kind of going, got a little off track there. Sure. so back to Jeff Bezos. Bezos, I think is how you're supposed to pronounce it.
Bezos, yes.
Bezos, yeah. He is following that sort of in the wake of that other commercial space flight company, which
those other
more
folks.
on that later, that their plan to send 2 humans around the moon. Blue Origin is saying, yeah, we're doing that too. And with the BE-4 rocket motor finally complete, Blue Origin just, they finished their most recent iteration of the rocket motor that they're working on. With that completion, like, they're one step closer to developing New Glenn. And once we have New Glenn and the development of New Armstrong starts, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more out of Blue Origin and a lot more promise out of them too. And that's not to say that we're not seeing promise out of other space launch systems.
My concern is still a crewed mission out of them. Honestly, it's not something that we've seen them do much of, if at all. They haven't launched any crewed missions, have they?
They've launched 6 suborbital. So they launched on the New Shepard. It's suborbital. So really, basically just a really high parabolic arc, up to about 103 kilometers up. But they've been able to re-land the same first stage, the booster, land and relaunch that 5 times. They just recently did a test where they tested the emergency abort sequence, and that took its toll on the booster, although the booster still was able to land even after what would have been considered a critical failure mission. And they're working on maybe reusing that one, but they're building a second New Shepard right now to start launching again this year. It's always later this year with space companies, right?
Yes. Just a few more months.
I thought space is easy.
Right. Yeah.
But they have not launched any crewed missions yet. However, from what I hear, one of the missions later this year will be crewed, a suborbital flight, a crewed suborbital flight, which actually will be the first time, unless SpaceX or Boeing beat them to it, that a commercial entity has launched a crew into space. I mean, Virgin Galactic, well, it wasn't Virgin Galactic at the time, it was Scaled Composites, did this with Spaceship One in 2004. But that was it was a space plane. It launched, took off as a plane and landed as a plane. This is the first time that we're sending people up on a booster, like on a traditional rocket, blunt object capsule with people inside.
Right. Yeah. What always concerns me about doing this in the commercial space is, granted, it's always been, space has always been, NASA administrates the programs. They run the programs with program managers, and they build some things in-house, but most things are built by your big contractors, your Lockheeds, your Northrops, so on and so forth. But all of that data is sort of, all that data, all that experience, all of that expertise is sort of consolidated into one place where if 10 years ago they flew up a crewed mission, then you can almost guarantee that you'll at least see a good chunk of the people, the technical manuals, the documentation, all of those things still in the same place. Now, while NASA can help distribute some of that information to organizations like Blue Origins and SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and so on and so forth, it's just interesting that they're, to some extent, they have to operate in sort of these individual silos where you have to worry about, has this company done a crewed mission before? Whereas when NASA just says that they want to do a crewed mission and then hires any one of these guys, you have a little bit more assurance that they can handle it because they have that backing. But when these guys decide to go up, just sort of with their own private projects, obviously still doing some coordination with NASA, but for the most part trying to work alone, there's inherently a bit of a higher risk there. And that's just something we have it's just new to the time that we're dealing with.
It's a whole new paradigm, and I think this is the perfect segue into talking about sort of our main topic today. As always, SpaceX, but how I think SpaceX can save the world. Now,
let us hear it.
Listeners from last week will kind of ask why the change of faith. There is no change of faith. Like I am very hesitant to put my full support behind SpaceX. I don't think.
Here's my thing. I don't mean to interrupt you while I'm interrupting you, but
interrupt you with an interruption.
Yes, but I 100% support SpaceX. It's whether or not I have faith that the things that they're talking about, for the things that they're talking about to succeed, is a different question. I will always have a natural skepticism for reasons like the one I just listed. But I'm going to let you go on. Yep.
It's my moment.
Back on your soapbox.
You're stealing it. No, I completely agree.
Yes.
The more companies, I don't want like 500 companies to come out and say they're building a rocket, because then who knows what's going to happen? Like that just can't happen.
The FAA and NASA would go insane.
The FAA would just be like, nope. 3 of you. We only need 3. But it's with SpaceX, I'm very supportive of their existence. Like, I love the fact that we don't just rely on the space shuttle anymore.
Absolutely.
I'm glad that ULA, United Launch Alliance, has some competition, because they have a perfect track record. Well, near perfect. They have, and I think I mentioned this last week, they had 1 incident on a Delta IV medium or Delta IV heavy that they launched, where it launched and it didn't get there was like some small electrical problem or something, and it just didn't get to the right orbit, but it still got to orbit. They have a near perfect track record, but they cost a lot. If you want to fly on ULA, you're expecting to spend $75 million or more, depending on the launch vehicle. Which actually is kind of sort of side note. We should link this in the description of the video or the show notes. That ULA actually came out with a build your own rocket toolkit online, where you could build your mission with the different configurations of all the rockets. It's kind of cool to play around with, but you could see the price tag at the end. How much does this actually cost? I think they were using that in part to sort of get everybody into thinking that space is costly. It's easy. Not really.
It's super easy.
It's so easy. Why aren't more people doing it? But it's costly. But so back to SpaceX. SpaceX is giving ULA sort of a little bit of a challenge, because even though SpaceX isn't, they've launched 3 times in the last 6 months, 2 times in the last 6 months,
twice. But
yet they are still the number 1 trending thing when you look up space exploration. SpaceX has this crazy popular brand that it really has sort of caught fire.
People respect their ability to take risk. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Just from the general populace side, not even talking from from the actual space community, but the general populace. The reason people like and respect SpaceX so much is because they're willing to sit. They're willing to say, we will sit on the edge where the government usually sits, and take those types of risks. And they do it in a way that is okay. It's always going to be a more scaled down version of where the government sits, but they are still taking the risk.
Yeah. And this sort of goes into what my paper was about. Maybe a little summary for everybody. That I talk about how the Apollo
Give us the abstract.
The abstract. Apollo happened not because of the Kennedy moment, where Kennedy stood. It was May 25th, 1961. That date is like ingrained in my brain. Apollo didn't happen because of that moment, and also didn't happen just because we were in the Cold War, or just because NASA had the organizational structure to do it, or just because von Braun was on the team. It was a confluence of all of these things that it is this very complex Apollo formula that all of the pieces were met. It was a veritable perfect storm, if you will, of all of these very high stakes variables coming together to form the Apollo formula. And that's what led to the success of it. I mean, and these are things from the organizational structure of NASA, how NASA partnered with the Air Force to develop a very rugged, regimented structure to achieving its milestones and goals. Because as we saw with the Mercury and Gemini programs, there were delays and problems along the way that could have been fixed by more stringent testing or more stringent policies around organizational cooperation. There, of course, was the geopolitical aspect of it, which was amplified by Kennedy's call to arms, basically, to get humans on the moon. I say in the paper that if a Antarctic mission could have achieved the same thing, we'd have a picture of Neil Armstrong at the South Pole. And then I think almost the most important was the confluence and sort of congruence of values. Sort of everybody was on the same page. We were going to beat the Russians because we had God-fearing, strapping young men, Eagle Scouts who, were, the pinnacle of American exceptionalism. Like these were the boys that were going to beat the communists. Right. You're seeing almost the same thing with SpaceX. That they are there's a reason why on Glassdoor and LinkedIn, they are the number one place to work, is because everyone goes in every day being like, I'm part of this mission. I'm 100% committed to the values. There's such a values congruence across all of SpaceX, from your engineers to your scientists to your government affairs people, that SpaceX is the answer. And I don't know how much of SpaceX's success is just them willing it, saying, I'm going to succeed, therefore I will succeed. Or if it's also because there's this level of I want to say camaraderie, that everyone's on the same team, that everyone is they have the same goal in mind, and they're able to almost be the Air Force or NASA and the Air Force in the 1960s of putting pedal to the metal when they need to, and developing these rugged, rigid systems that are able to and not systems as in technical systems, but organizational systems.
I definitely agree with those points, but one thing I will say is, okay, I agree. Never doubt never underestimate the power of a heavily motivated engineer. Absolutely, sure. And you get a team of those engineers. You could. I'm not going to say change the world on this podcast, but
I already said it. I said save.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you already said
save
it earlier. But you also have, when you have a CEO, or a founder that is willing, that that is willing to expose their pocketbook in the way that in the way that Musk has. While you can say never underestimate the power of a motivated engineer, never underestimate the power of a CEO who's willing to nearly go bankrupt for something that he truly believes in. And I mean, that's one of the great things about Musk. While he's literally taking risks that, I mean, I can think of very few individuals in the history of the country, I would dare say, who would be willing to take that level of risk, who are already at that status. There's plenty of people who take risk and fail all the time. That literally happens all the time. But someone of Musk's status, with Musk's pocketbook, to be taking risks this heavy, and I mean, I just think it's incredible. And you were saying earlier that some of these things are a product of the time that we live in. This is one of those things. Not only is it a property of the time that that things are going a bit more to the private sector. Elon Musk is a property of our time. That made him sound way bigger than I wanted him to sound. But
well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, we're gonna look back, and I mean, we're gonna see Elon Musk on the same level as we see Henry Ford and Thomas Jefferson, of these like great inventors and innovators that really defined the time, whether we like it or not, and whether we agree with the methodology or not. You got to give the man some credit. I mean, and I think Musk almost single-handedly has changed the paradigm of space exploration. Tom is really excited with me saying this, I'm sure. But like, I think Musk is changing the game. And whether we like it or not, companies that are going to compete, and the government, which is not competing with Musk, but trying to meet him on some level to build these partnerships between Musk and the other companies, are going to have to change. Musk is making it the Elon Musk show, not the space exploration show anymore, or the NASA show. It's all about sort of how all of these pieces fit into place, and how, Musk can have, he could be the first one that has humans on Mars. I mean, I'm just going to say it now, like, his ambitions are grand. And I think the first...
You don't say. That's pretty, but, I mean, pretty daring of you. But okay.
I think the first astronauts on Mars are going to still be wearing the NASA badges. I mean, I don't think that we're going to have SpaceX astronauts on Mars first.
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
But they're going to have ridden on a SpaceX capsule. I think... I can see that. I think every astronaut that sets foot on Mars is going to have had some training in the Dragon 2 capsule, or Dragon 3 or 4, or whatever it is at that time. Because Red Dragon, I think that instead of, astronauts have to learn English, Russian, Chinese, depending on where they're going, but have to be bilingual. At least they have to speak all these different languages, and especially like computer coding languages to debug problems and so forth. They're also going to have to be able to be well-versed in all of the commercial vehicles. An astronaut going to Mars is going to have to know how to fly a CST-100 Starliner, going to have to know how to fly a Dragon 2, going to have to know how to fly an Orion crew capsule. All of these things are sort of coming out of this new culture that we're in, that almost is designed to make Musk win regardless. I mean, I don't think we're going to see SpaceX go bankrupt, because I think they've established themselves so much as a entity within the community and within culture as it is. Like, everyone's heard of SpaceX. It's a household name at this point. They've established that so much that they're almost destined not to fail. And I hate using that word destined, fate, destiny. Like we're talking about space exploration. These are things no one has ever done before. But he's already put himself in a really good place that he's not an alternative to NASA, but he's NASA's best contractor. And I'm sure United Launch Alliance hates that. Orbital ATK hates that. And Jeff Bezos he's trying to get some of those government funds too. But I think we're in this really interesting transitioning time that we're going from one paradigm of almost entirely government-sponsored space exploration to this new paradigm of it might only be 2 or 3 launches a year where you get commercial crews up in space, but it's going to be almost as regular as finding, Earth-like planets in distant solar systems.
Sure. And also, I mean, just having a market, being able to say that Orbital and ULA and SpaceX are all sort of competing against each other, that's overall good for the industry. It just having, and not to get on the capitalism train and all that, but but having these different organizations competing, inventing new technologies, having them go out and motivate a number of engineers not only to create but to stay in the field, that in and of itself is extremely beneficial to the overall field and to overall helping NASA's mission, which is mostly what I care about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like we say on the when we're going on the Hill and blitzing or trying to convince people of why we should be spending the money that we do on space exploration, it's not like we put $19.5 billion in a capsule and send it up into space and tell commercial companies go get it. Those dollars are spent here on planet Earth, and that's jobs, that's an economy, that's completely new industries and markets that are opening up. And I guess I'm hopping on this #capitalism's train right now too. But I mean, it's just kind of the world we live in. Yeah. It has its problems right now, but I mean, like we're making the best of it, and I think SpaceX is at the forefront of it.
Absolutely. All right, you want to do one more quick news item that I clearly skipped over before we get out of here?
We'll do one more, and then we will wrap up episode 2.
Sounds good, and this will be super quick. China to launch space station core module in 2018. So a news article out of Xinhua News on March 2nd stated that China will launch a space station core module in 2018 as the first step in completing the country's first space outpost, according to senior engineers at CASC, the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corp, on Thursday. The core module of the space station, named Tian-1, I probably screwed that up, but I'm pretty sure it's Tian or Xian-1, will be launched on board a new generation Long March 5 heavyweight carrier rocket. It will be followed by a series of launches for other components of the space station, including 2 space labs, which will dock with the core module while in space in the next 4 years or so. Adding that the space station will be completed around 2022. So China's going to have a decent space station in 2022.
Yeah. I mean, I think good on them. This is so for people who haven't really been paying attention to the international arena for space exploration. This has actually been a long time coming. China has been trying to get into the game for quite a while. And the U.S. has helped in the past. We helped them design some of their first rockets that they were using. And the developments after that led us to this point for the Chinese space program. I mean, I think the more players that you have in the field, the better right now, because much to the chagrin of all the gray-haired members of Congress, I was going to call out their party, but I won't. Yelling and screaming on the Hill that China's causing, this is the second space race, like we got to beat the communists again, and it's like,
this is
no,
not the second space race.
You're
I'm
wrong.
sorry, it's just not.
You're very wrong.
I've heard that argument on multiple fronts, stating that, if China were to, say that they're going to, going to Jupiter tomorrow and stuff like that. I don't think that. I think obviously we are competing with China on multiple fronts. I don't think this is one of them. Quite honestly.
So here's the thing that I've noticed in international space politics. Competition is not the C word that people use. Cooperation is the name of the game right now. I mean, if you look at the International Space Station, we wouldn't have done, like, it would not have happened without President Clinton bringing in the Russians in 97. Much to the chagrin of all the members of the European Space Agency, who were excited about the space station, and then the Russians get involved, and it's kind of this weird, like, oh, we kind of used to hate you.
This is awkward.
It's a little awkward. But it's melted some of the Cold War tensions. That,
I mean, you even saw that in the last administration. I mean, it's not like we were best friends with Russia in the last last United States administration. However, we still hitched a ride with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those areas that, like, cooperation's the name of the game. And I'm almost starting to see that it's an evolution. The last sort of the entirety of the space program or the space race, space era, space age. Let's call it the space age. Since 1957, since then it's gone from competition to cooperation, sort of in the 90s and 2000s up until now. And now we're kind of at this place of coexistence where we're recognizing not just commercial entities within the United States, but also ESA and JAXA and China now too, recognizing that they are spacefaring nations because it's ultimately bettering the people of those countries, and also space can be used to better relations between countries. I mean, when Russia invaded Crimea, one of the or allegedly invaded Crimea, one of the big questions that us in the space policy community asked was, how is this going to affect our relationship with Russia? Because we, the United States, kind of came out and said, Russia, you shouldn't have done this.
Wag the finger a little bit.
Wag the finger a little bit.
Yep.
But it hasn't really impacted the cooperation that we've had. And we're getting to this point of coexistence where in space we can sort of use the tools of international politics to mend terrestrial affairs. And I think investing
I don't know about mending. I think that, I mean, there's obviously, I think there are certain national investments that are that we are so dependent on that we're unwilling to pull away from them, even in light of certain conflicts. I mean, you see that all the time with trade, and that goes back, way farther than anything in the space age. We've traded with allies of nations that we've been at war with, with parts of, or with territories of those nations themselves. And I think that will always be something that, even in this case that we will do. And this kind of goes back to, the kind of unintended theme of this, which is space is costly. It is an investment for a nation, not only in terms of money, but in terms of, in terms of just progress overall and that progress isn't just about the nation itself. It's just kind of human progress. Right. So,
are you one of them liberals?
Those liberals.
This is the future liberals want is. I saw one of those memes where it was the cast picture from Next Generation.
Star
Trek Next Generation. It was like, this is the future that liberals want. It's like, the Galactic Federation, like, kind of would be nice, like a unified Earth. But
it's not a we hope that that we can do this together because it's the right thing to do. It's kind of a we have to do this together. If for any individual nation that's going to try to do this. And I'm glad to see that China has this is one of the first big one of the first big steps that China has going forward. You know, they have planned Mars probes coming up. They have possible future missions to Jupiter and other extra Jovian planets. So I'm glad that they're hopping on board, because they have you know, for the number of things that we can talk about that are not okay with China, you know, they have some economy and the willpower from a government, the investment to do these kinds of things. So I'm happy with them doing it.
Yeah. So it's maybe to close out this segment, it's less of a space race and more of a space 5K fun run. I wanted to get that little quip in there.
A space relay marathon. How's that sound?
We'll meet in the middle. It's a relay marathon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're about to see I mean, if we're following this very optimistic paradigm of how space is to progress from here on out, I think it's nice to see China as a player. United Arab Emirates is also a player. They're sending a probe to Mars in 2019, I think, is their launch date now.
India's had plenty of news lately with the Indian Space Agency.
Yeah, I mean, we're in an era. We're really getting into the space era, space age.
Yep.
And I think to close off our minds and our policies to options is detrimental to this forward progress of humanity.
Now, with that said, if there's any Congress members listening to this, hurry up and fund NASA, because China is on their way.
Yeah, China's going to...
Okay. They're going to get to Mars before us. You don't want that to happen, right? I'm just saying.
You don't want the Reds on the red planet.
Yes.
I think we need a bumper sticker that says that.
No Reds on the red. All right.
Yeah. So we just broke the hour mark on this episode. So I guess it is time to sign off. Like we were saying, like we talked about a bunch this week, even though it was sort of a slow space week. Links and everything are in the description. As always,
visit us on Twitter. Go ahead. All you.
I was going to say Twitter. Yeah.
Yes.
Follow us at Ad Astra Podcast on Twitter, and elemental.fm is the website. You can get email updates from there, and check out Tom's show, Reminiscent. They're on episode 17, I think. So I guess maybe when this one airs, they'll be on 18 or 19, but
probably
whatever. But, as always, I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
Ad Astra.